Subscribe to our channel and hit the bell icon so that you know when live we go. Your exam is on 4th of October. Now less than 2 weeks are left. During this time, you should not be stressing yourself by reading more. Rather, the best way to utilize this time is to solve some mock test. It will serve two purposes. One, it will keep your nerve under control during the exam because you would have practiced tests before actually giving the prelims. And secondly, you will be covering many themes of last 1 year through these mock tests. So the important topics you will be familiar with, you will be having more confidence on the morning of the exam. We have designed 2 tests under Pre-Parikshan program. There are 200 questions based upon 200 important themes of last 1 year. I would encourage you to attempt both the tests and see if you are getting around 90 to 100 marks. If you are getting, then you are doing okay. It will also boost up your confidence that you have covered enough topic. The registration link is given in the description below. Register yourself and test yourself on the same parameters on which UPSC is going to test you. Today we have posted a new question in our weekly series of mains question assignment from DNS. If you go to our ELEARN platform in the tab mains assignment question, you will find the latest question posted. The question is this: integration of India with the global value chains has the potential to bring about much needed structural transformation of Indian economy. In this regard, examine various constraints that have hindered India's integration into global value chains. You must answer this question within 250 words. See, 85% of mains examination is about answer writing. And if you do answer writing in synchronization with DNS, that will enhance your learning experience from the DNS. This question has been created from the DNS of 7 September 2020. From the discussion titled Mixed Messaging, India's Integration into Global Value Chains, Prospects and Challenges. If you are not familiar with the topic, you may watch the discussion before you attempt answering this question. See, there are few big little things that I must tell you regarding posting your answers. You may type your answer in the comment box, or you can click the image and send the answer to us. Preferably, you write on piece of paper and take the image, because that is what you are going to do in the final examination. All those of you who will send the answers by Saturday will get the evaluation and feedback from RAU'S teachers. For posting the answer, you just click on the question and then a dialog box will appear. You make sure that you are posting in the main dialog box and you are not posting your answer as a reply to someone else's answer. Otherwise, your post may not be evaluated. It's very important that you post your answer in the portrait mode. Otherwise, you will be held responsible for any cervical problem developed by the evaluators. Mains is all about speed. So try to keep a tab on the time you have taken to write the answer. It will be a good practice if you mention the time taken on the answer sheet. You may also mention the city and state from where you are posting the answer. This will help us in knowing that students are benefiting across India and DNS is reaching every nook and corner of the country. In the description of the video, there is a link for the question assignment where you can participate in the discussion on RAU'S ELEARN platform. In the next 40 minutes, we are going to run through today's newspaper, The Hindu, Delhi edition dated 24th September. The articles that we shall be taking up for discussion has been tabulated on your screen and the time stamping for the same has been given at the appropriate place. Here is the self-assessment speed test which you must attempt within 5 minutes. This will help you to understand what information you do not know so that you wait for it like an attentive tiger and pick these information as and when it comes during the course of DNS. This will increase your curiosity and also place the information in your long-term memory. Next on the screen is going to appear the answer to these questions. You find out your score and take the test again after taking the DNS. This is a lead article from page number 6. It is titled Weighing In on the Efficacy of Female Leadership. Weighing in meaning making argument for it, pushing for it. In this article, the author has weighed in The author has made arguments in favor of female leadership in politics. The introduction to the article can become a very good introduction to one of your essay on gender issues. The introduction of the article goes like this. What do Germany, Taiwan, and New Zealand have in common? These are the countries that have women heading their governments. And although they are located in 3 different continents, the 3 countries seem to have managed the pandemic much better than their neighbors. Along the same line, a study done by researchers in the United States recently has reported that states that have female governors have fewer COVID-19 related deaths. This study concluded that women leaders are more effective than their male counterparts in times of crisis. But the author also concedes that these studies do not establish the superiority of all female leaders over their male counterparts. However, such studies highlight the necessity of getting rid of inherent biases and perceptions about female effectiveness in leadership roles. So this introduction highlights the importance of women's leadership role in politics, but does not create a reverse stereotype. Let's try to answer this question. Why do we need more women in political leadership? First of all, on the most fundamental level, this is a question of democratic representation. Women constitute around 50% of population. So by virtue of only this, they must be represented in the leadership position. But if that does not sound convincing to people, we can go on giving more reasons. For example, women bring more perspective and experience to politics. It has been amply documented that when women faced with the exercise of power, women tend towards cooperation rather than competition. So women's leadership becomes extremely important for harmonious development of society, and it becomes extremely important in conflict resolution. According to UK's first special envoy for gender equality, who visited India recently, Joanna Roper, she says women make a real difference in peace negotiations, and 60% of peace negotiations made by women are less likely to fail. She gives more statistics like 35% are more likely to last for more than 15 years. So in conflict region, the importance of women political leadership becomes extremely important. Joanna Roper says that there is a strong evidence that if you bring women together, everyone benefits. To show how everyone benefits, let's take some more examples. Esther Duflo, who is now a Nobel laureate, conducted some study in 2000s in central India. Her study concluded that village pradhans invested more in rural infrastructure that served better the needs of their own gender. For instance, women pradhans were more likely to invest in providing easy access to drinking water, since collection of drinking water is primarily, if not solely, responsibility of women. This shows that if women comes to leadership position, they are going to serve the interest of women better. To give you some more international case studies, let's take example of Iceland. Iceland leads in many of the human development indicators. This can be seen in the perspective that participation of Icelandic women in political decision making is more than 44%. Bangladesh is an extraordinary example of female leadership. Since 1991, largely their prime minister has been women. For a few years, for a few months, there have been male prime minister, but largely since 1991, Bangladesh have had female prime minister. And we see the real difference in lives of Bangladeshi women. Bangladesh performs the best in South Asia in terms of gender equality. Also, in terms of female entrepreneurship, Bangladesh is leading in South Asia. National Bureau of Economic Research paper that came out in 2014 found a strong connection between implementation of political reservation and small-scale entrepreneurship among women. The paper noted that there was a growth of approximately 40% in women-owned establishments and associated employment after political reservations were implemented. We have political reservation for women in local governance, and the political reservation data between 1994 to 2005 was taken into account to come to this conclusion. You can also give reference to one public opinion survey that was done in Rajasthan that revealed that women in villages with head council position reserved for women are likely to be willing to report crimes to police. There is more trust and confidence in the administration with the presence of women. It can make administration smoother and it can become a tool for good governance in India. See, this question of women leadership is a very broad one. It goes into the economic sphere, social sphere, political sphere, but the article is confined to the political leadership. We'll also confine ourselves to political leadership only. But to achieve gender equality in general, in society, in all walks of life, politics can serve as an example because it is easy to do here. It is easy to monitor as well. We have political reservation already in local governance. There's a bill pending in Parliament for reservation of women in Parliament and Legislative Assembly. It can be done. And the numbers for political leadership can also be seen and analyzed very easily. So these are the reasons why we must have women leaders in political positions. Now, what is the status of women leadership in politics? It's not very good. Although the 2019 election sent the largest number of women to Lok Sabha, but women still constitute only 14% of total strength of Lok Sabha, and only 10% of women are ministers. There is a very positive example from the country Rwanda. There, 60% of seats in its lower house is occupied by women. At one point of time, India had 4 women chief ministers, but presently there is only one, Miss Banerjee from West Bengal. Because of poor representation of women in parliament and otherwise, India has a very poor rank in terms of political representation of women. India stands 143 out of 192 countries, and the data is provided by Inter-Parliamentary Union. Inter-Parliamentary Union basically is an international organization, a union of all the national parliaments of various democracies of the world. The article suggests that one easy and straight way to increase political representation and leadership in politics of women is to take through the Women Reservation Bill. Women faces numerous challenges. Challenges with respect to stereotyping, challenges with respect to campaigning because of poor financial condition, low asset ownership, etc. So a level playing field can be created by the legal measure, and one measure is to provide reservation in the parliament and legislative assemblies. Women Reservation Bill was first presented in Lok Sabha in 1996. Then successively it was reintroduced by various governments, but the thing as it stands today is this. Rajya Sabha has passed the bill in 2010. It is pending in Lok Sabha. And the state legislatures are also yet to give their approval. Because in this case, approval of state assemblies will also be required because the bill seeks to provide reservation to women in legislative assemblies as well. So approval from at least 50% of states must also come. The author suggests that since the bill has been thrown into the cold store, alternatively what can be done, the leading political parties or alliance like NDA and UPA, they must reserve a third of their party nomination for women. So this will ensure greater entry of women into legislatures without the provision of reservation. The only problem with this suggestion is the political parties who are stalling the bill in the parliament, how can it be expected from them to take initiative outside the parliament? The author says that the main hurdle against women taking up political leadership position is the prejudice against them. Women are not seen as capable as men in taking up the political leadership position. And this prejudice existed all over the globe. Women didn't have the voting rights in European countries until after First World War. And many countries like France gave the voting right only after Second World War. There was the problem of prejudice. Women were not seen fit for the task. This prejudice was broken during First World War in Europe. When most able-bodied men, the healthy men, went in the battlefield to fight the war, women had the opportunity to show their mettle, to show that they are good enough, to show that they are at par with men, to show that they can take activities that were solely preserved for men earlier. Women started to go to factories, work on the factory floor just as men, which was unimagined before. In Europe, the war created this opportunity for women, and women proved their mettle. And this broke the anti-female bias, and this was partly responsible for women earning the right to vote in European countries. A similar example comes from Bangladesh. As we have talked before, that since 1991, Bangladesh has seen mostly female prime minister. And this had huge impact on the nation. Bangladesh today stands at 7th position globally in political empowerment of women. When you see a female leading the nation, then there is no question of stereotyping that females are not fit for the task. It breaks down the stereotype in the society. And once that is broken down, then equal opportunity is created for women. In India, although we have had many female chief ministers, we also had a female prime minister, Miss Indira Gandhi, but that kind of a strong leadership from female has not come yet. And there is no chance of having a crisis like Europe had, where female will automatically take up the leadership position. So in case of India, to break up the stereotype, female have to be brought to the leadership position through the means of reservation. And once they will come up to the leadership position, that will decrease the bias among the voters. And automatically that will increase the percentage of female politicians contesting and winning elections. And in the longer run, maybe quotas may no longer be necessary once this biasness stereotype is broken down. This is a lead article from page number 6. It has been titled, Seeing Dystopia in India's Democracy. See, United Nations has declared 15th of September as International Day of Democracy. This provided an opportunity to review the state of democracy in the world, and this article reviews the state of democracy in India. The article has been titled, Seeing Dystopia in India's Democracy. Dystopia is opposite of utopia. Utopia is an imaginary state where everything is goody-goody. It is like a place jahan gham bhi na ho, aansu bhi na ho, bas pyar hi pyar pale. Dystopia, being opposite of utopia, is a place where suffering of people is more, where there is an authoritative regime, where there is no social support, and people are left to fend for themselves. So the title itself makes it clear that the author is not of a very high opinion of India's democracy. India is world's largest democracy, and Constitution of India identifies India as a democracy. Preamble declares India to be sovereign, socialist, secular, democratic republic. The Republic of India, hence, is a democracy. This is seen by the fact that India has multi-party system, election happens on time, there is universal suffrage. Everyone has the right to vote, and the right is restricted only by age, not by any other factor. Election Commission of India seems to be working independently. There is timely election and there is a smooth changeover of government after elections. There is separation of civilian government and army. There is existence of independent press and judiciary. Not so much of press these days, but judiciary definitely is working as an independent organ in Indian democracy. There is guarantee of civil liberties by Indian constitutions, and the rights of the citizens are justifiable in the court of law. On these parameters, there is no problem in Indian democracy. But the author is of the opinion that evaluating Indian democracy like this will not be a right approach, because these parameters evaluate the design of the Indian democracy, not the outcome of the democracy. He makes an analogy that doing this will be tantamount to evaluating the architecture of a building and not looking into the happiness of people dwelling in that building. Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru, in his 15th of August 1947 speech, stated that the goal of independence was to create institutions which will ensure justice and fullness of life to every man and woman. So while evaluating Indian democracy, we should look whether the citizens are enjoying justice and fullness of life. So the outcome is what we should be evaluating any democracy on. And if we do that, then we start to look at a more clear and realistic picture. For instance, in the UN's World Happiness Report 2020, India has been ranked 144 out of 153 countries. This is a very poor ranking. And the fact is not just that India is holding a low rank. The problem is that this rank has been sliding since last few years. Similarly, in the Economic Intelligence Unit's Democracy Index, India has been ranked 51 in 2019. And again in this case, India has seen a drop of 10 ranks from 2018. In the last 6 years, among 167 countries, India saw the second highest decline in civil liberties. Similarly, if we see India's performance in United Nations Human Development Index, then in 2019, India has been ranked 129 out of 189 countries. Again, this is far from being impressive. Freedom in the World 2020 report has ranked India 83rd, and in the Transparency International's Corruption Perception Index 2019, India has been ranked 80th out of 180 countries. These indices shows the outcome or perception of citizen towards the government, and the numbers on your screen might be giving the idea that Indian democracy is slipping towards dystopia. And hence the title of the article, Seeing Dystopia in India's Democracy. Now, what is the solution? How do we ensure that we change the gear and we move towards utopia? The author suggests that democracy is all about people. Democracy is not synonymous to statism, meaning people are paramount, people are powerful, and the role of the state will always be limited and facilitative in nature. The institutions that enable people to lead a fulfilling life are built by people themselves. Author gives few examples in the context of US. In 1960s, United Nations saw movement for black empowerment, women's emancipation, and sexual liberation. All these three movements were remarkably successful. They have achieved the desired goal, and there was no support for these movements from the US state. So democracy is a form of government by the people, of the people, and for the people. But to be for the people, it has to be by the people. You can find many examples in Indian context as well. Right to Information Act was the example of people's movement. Right to education in India is also a glaring example of success of people's movement. The amendments in the criminal procedures and formation of Nirbhaya Fund was the result of people's outrage and people's demand. There have been many environmental movements led by people of India. Do some brainstorming, try to think of some more examples where people's movement have led to the desired outcome in our democracy. But this is not to say that there is no role of state. State has the authority to impose its decision because of the social contract. The state has to play a crucial role in building and supporting the institutions that have been envisaged by people. And this is done mainly by ensuring liberty to the citizens and building capabilities. Liberty previously was seen as absence of tyranny, absence of constraint on citizens. For example, everyone has the right to vote, and that right is restricted only by age. Everyone has the right to trade, everyone has the right to own asset, everyone has the right to seek education, stand for election, etc. etc. There is no restraint on anyone. This is a classical concept of liberty. UPSC asked a question in 2019. In the context of polity, which one of the following would you accept as the most appropriate definition of liberty? Protection against tyranny of political rulers, absence of restraint, opportunity to do whatever one likes, or opportunity to develop oneself fully. There was a lot of confusion in this question as to what will be the right answer, but the most appropriate answer is option number D. Liberty actually is opportunity to develop oneself fully. It's not just absence of tyranny or absence of restraint. If you read Preamble of India promises to its citizen liberty of thought, expression, belief, faith and worship. And fine reading into this line will give you the answer. Liberty of thought and expression and belief, faith and worship too is actually to develop one's full potential. Liberty in modern polity is seen as opportunity to develop oneself fully. So liberty is actually very closely related and dependent on capability development. So the state has role in development of capabilities in citizens. And this capability approach was first talked about by Nobel laureate Amartya Sen. Professor Sen had this idea of capability as endowments that allow individuals to take the functionings or to do things that they value. And this also means to develop oneself fully. So there is overlapping feature of liberty and capability, and the state must ensure these two things to all citizens. On a very basic fundamental level, a person's health and education can be taken as two most important input into his or her capabilities. In fact, United Nations measure the capabilities of population by Human Development Index. And the main element of Human Development Index is nothing but education and health. So if primarily these two things are fixed, then it can be said that the state is on its way to ensure liberty and capabilities to citizens. And once citizens have capability, then they can participate in the democratic process of the nation. And then people can get involved in building up democracy. Then we can have people's movement, an establishment of rights and institutions that will ensure the perpetual enforcement of rights. But you know our democracy has problem in giving these two basic inputs into capacity building. People have been hindered from seeking education for various reasons. One reason could be caste system, other reason could be poverty, the third reason could be lack of infrastructure, the fourth reason could be lack of will and enthusiasm on part of teachers. National Education Policy 2020 is a landmark in this regard. This policy has declared education as a social good. So by definition, it must be provided with quality to everyone. But that cannot be ensured until the public expenditure in education and health is not increased. So if we zero down to a single question, where do we begin from in making our democracy utopian? The answer could be found on this slide. We began by increasing our public expenditure on education and health. This article is from page number 1. CAG is saying that Rafale vendors yet to confirm technology transfer. CAG in its recent report has questioned the implementation of offset clause in India's defense procurement procedure, saying that companies are not fulfilling their offset obligation. In its report titled CAG's Performance Audit Report on Management of Defense Offset, CAG has pointed out that Dassault Aviation and European missile maker MBDA, which supplies armament for the Rafale jet, have not yet discharged their 30% offset obligation. They have not even made it clear whether they are going to do it or not. CAG in its report has said that many a times foreign vendors like Dassault Aviation give commitment for offset to get the tender, but after getting the tender they do not fulfill their commitments. The particular case of Dassault Aviation that CAG is referring to was the transfer of technology to DRDO for indigenous development of Kaveri engine, which is used for Tejas, the light combat aircraft of India. But Dassault Aviation has not done the transfer of technology, and hence Tejas is not completely indigenously developed presently. You must remember some numbers for your mains examination. From 2005 to 2018, foreign vendors made offset commitment of around rupees 66,000 crore. And out of this, so far, only rupees 11,300 crore has been realized. So there's a need to look into India's defense offset policy to promote indigenization of defense industry. Let me now tell you what is defense offset policy. In general, any offset policy is a mechanism to partially compensate a nation for significant outflow of a country's resource in large purchase of foreign goods and services. And under this mechanism, the foreign supplier invests in the buyer's industry or help the buyer in doing research and development, or does the technology transfer to the buyer so that in long run, the buyer can indigenously develop that equipment. Since the investment is huge in case of large defense acquisition, so the idea of offset is to strengthen the buyer's industry as well. So maybe the seller is going to procure some raw material, some very basic equipment from the buyer's industry itself, and then give the final finished product to the buyer. And technology transfer is one important component of offset mechanism. This outsourcing and technology transfer will help ultimately in developing a strong local ecosystem for defense manufacturing. India adopted the offset policy for defense capital purchases in 2005. And the rule until recently was this, that if the capital purchase is above rupees 300 crore, then the foreign vendor has to invest at least 30% of the value of purchase in India. The investment can be done in procuring some raw material from India. The investment can be done in doing R&D in India, or the investment can be done by doing the technology transfer to India. You must remember that this number rupees 300 crore has been raised to rupees 2000 crore via the Defence Acquisition Procedure 2020 that was released in March this year. So the offset obligation now has to be fulfilled only on purchases worth more than rupees 2000 crore. Defence Acquisition Procedure 2020 was discussed in the DNS dated 21st March 2020. If you are not familiar with the new defense acquisition rules, then it would be wise to go through that particular article of this DNS. This article is from page number 12. It is titled Centre Retained Rupees 1.1 lakh crore of cess receipts. It has been pointed out by CAG that Centre has collected rupees 2.75 lakh crore in the year 2018-19 through imposition of various cess. Usually the proceed of the cess is transferred to Consolidated Fund of India, and later with Parliament's approval the fund is credited to a dedicated fund. Because the money collected from cess can be used for only some specific purpose. So for every cess there has to be a dedicated fund. Now the observation of CAG in the recent report is that not more than 1.1 lakh crore has been transferred to dedicated fund. Rest of the money is still lying in the Consolidated Fund of India, which effectively means that rest of the money is not being utilized for the purpose it was levied. In this context, let us look at cess from prelims perspective. First of all, cess is tax on tax. See, tax is charged on income. Suppose your taxable income is rupees 1 lakh and you are paying 5% tax on this. So the tax that you will pay will be rupees 5,000. Cess is charged on the tax, not on the income. For example, recently health and education cess was increased from 3% to 4%. And it is charged on income tax as well. So you have to pay health and education cess, which is 4%. So you will be paying a cess of rupees 200 on your tax of rupees 500, which is on the taxable income of rupees 1 lakh. So a cess is tax on tax. Cess is very different from tax. Tax goes to Consolidated Fund of India and that money can be used for any purpose. But the nature of cess is that it can be levied only for a specific purpose. Initially the cess do go to Consolidated Fund of India, but it has to be transferred with the parliamentary approval to some dedicated fund. It cannot be diverted for any other purpose. You must also know that the money levied through cess which goes to dedicated fund are non-lapsable. There is one very important feature of cess. The taxes that are collected by the central government that forms the divisible pool from which the Finance Commission distribute money among centre and states. But the money that has come from cess need not be shared by the central government with the state governments. That is kept wholly and solely by the centre. There is another important reason why government resort to levying cess. Cess is easy to introduce. It does not have to go through the legislative procedure that any introduction of new tax has to go through. A cess can be increased or new cess can be introduced by simple executive order. Central government levy many cess. For instance, health and education cess, which recently was increased from 3% to 4%. It is charged on corporate tax and also on income tax. It is charged basically on many central taxes. Central government has formed Prarambhik Shiksha Kosh or the Fund for Primary Education, Madhyamik and Uchchar Shiksha Kosh or the Secondary and the Higher Education Fund, and money levied from health and education cess are transferred to these funds. Then there is cess on crude oil, which is very high, 20%. This cess goes into Oil Industry Development Fund. Similarly, there is cess on BD, there is road and infrastructure cess. Previously, it was called as Central Road Cess and now it is called as Central Road and Infrastructure Cess. Previously, money coming from the cess was used for roadways, but recently via notification, government has widened the scope of it and it can be used for railways, it can be used for waterways, It can be used for any infrastructure development in general. You must also be aware that Krishi Kalyan Cess, Clean Environment Cess, Swachh Bharat Cess, they all have been subsumed under the GST. There is a news on page number 13. G4 seeks time-bound reform of Security Council. Recently, foreign ministers from the G4 grouping, which comprise India, Germany, Brazil, and Japan, met virtually to further the objective of reforming UNSC. G4 was formed in 2005 with the aim of reforming United Nations Security Council. The 4 member countries seeks to expand the membership of UNSC, and each one of them aspired to get a permanent membership in UNSC. And there has been renewal of the push for the reform during the 75th anniversary of formation of UN. However, this time around, G4 also stressed on expansion of UNSC for African nations. They called for representation from Africa in both permanent and temporary membership of UNSC. Now the question is, which African country can take the burden of maintaining peace and security in the world? Because it will require drain of lot of financial resource as well. With power comes responsibility. Apart from this, you must be aware of an informal grouping called as Coffee Club. This Coffee Club, comprising 40 member states, aims at holding up the reform for UNSC. They do not want expansion of permanent membership of UNSC. The obvious reason is that they are not the strong contender for UNSC permanent seat, and hence they do not want other nations to get it. It is led by countries like Italy, Spain, Austria, Canada, South Korea, Argentina, and also Pakistan. Italy and Spain oppose Germany's bid to permanent membership of UNSC. Pakistan opposed India's membership to UNSC. Similarly, Argentina, Paraguay, and other South American nations oppose the membership of Brazil, and Australia opposes the membership of Japan. Canada and South Korea are opposed to developing countries getting permanent seat at UNSC because many a times developing countries get fund from these countries. There is a news on page number 10. 40% toilets in government schools non-existent or unused, as per the CAG's finding. According to a recent report of CAG, public sector units have claimed to have constructed 1.4 lakh toilets in government schools. CAG audit conducted a physical survey of a sample of 2,695 toilets, and it was found that 40% of those surveyed toilets were non-existent, partially constructed or unused. Here you have to be aware about a scheme called as Swachh Vidyalaya Abhiyan. This was launched by Ministry of Human Resource Development in 2014. The purpose was to meet the Right to Education Act's mandate that all schools must have separate toilets for boys and girls. You must be aware of this fact that RTE requires the schools to have separate toilets for boys and girls. This is a big issue. One of the main reasons for dropout of girls from school is the absence of toilet facility. There is another news on page number 10, quality containers to move liquid oxygen. You must be reading about this in last few days. There have been shortage of medical oxygen in many hospitals. However, there is no overall shortage of supply of medical oxygen. The problem is of transportation. According to the statement of the Health Minister, India do not have shortage of production of medical oxygen. But medical oxygen is not being supplied everywhere. In this regard, you must understand that it is not easy to transport oxygen. See, the boiling point of oxygen is minus 183 degrees Celsius. That means above this temperature, oxygen will exist as gas. And for transportation, the oxygen have to be liquefied. Otherwise, you will be transporting very little oxygen. And to maintain the container of ISO standard below minus 180 degrees Celsius will not be an easy task. Secondly, you know the nature of oxygen gas. It oxidizes metal, so it is corrosive in nature. Stainless steel tankers are required of very high grade for carrying oxygen, and that kind of specialized carriers are not easily available. That is why Commerce and Industry Ministry has allowed Petroleum and Explosives Safety Organization to grant online permit for deploying ISO tank containers to move liquid oxygen. So the problem is not of production, the problem is lack of infrastructure for transportation of oxygen. Now let us do question for the day. Yesterday's question was this: consider the following statements about Part 17 of Indian Constitution. Statement 1: states are not allowed to adopt any language other than Hindi or English as the official language of the state. This is absolutely incorrect statement. You would be knowing the official language of your state. Almost all states have one regional language apart from Hindi or English as their official language. Statement 2 was, the national language of the union shall be Hindi in Devanagari script. See, the national language cannot be of union. The national language would be of nation. The correct statement is, the official language of the union shall be Hindi in Devanagari script. So both the statements are incorrect. The answer is option D. Today's question is this: consider the following statements. World Happiness Report is released by United Nations Development Programme. Statement 2, Democracy Index is released by OECD, Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. Which of the statements given above is are correct? One only, two only, both one and two, neither one nor two. With this, we have come to the end of the session for today. I hope you learned something in the last 40 minutes and do attempt the DNS quiz on the ELEARN platform. Thank you very much.